Hey there, this is Rabbi Chase Taub. I want to share with you a thought that might, for some of you, make a lot of things make sense. And it's based on the story of the Emperor's New Clothes. You know that story? It was made famous by Hans Christian Andersen, the Danish author, but it's actually an old legend. It goes back way before then. Basically, these scammers come and they know the king is a fool and that he is very vain, so they trick him by saying these clothes are so beautiful and so magnificent, only a real incredible person can see them, and of course the king doesn't want to admit they can't see them, so there's nothing there. It's really a pantomime. There are no clothes at all, but the king won't admit that he doesn't see the clothes, so then everyone else has to go along with it when he's parading around naked, and they have to pretend they also see the clothes, until this one little boy says, hey, the emperor's wearing no clothes, and everybody laughs at the king. So I think that story explains a lot about narcissistic families and the scapegoat. Now, I'll tell you, first of all, standard disclaimer. I'm a rabbi. This channel, Soul Words, is a channel about Jewish mysticism and spirituality and its application to our lives. I'm not a mental health professional. It happens to be sometimes when we're studying certain texts, we apply them to day-to-day life, and we end up sort of foraying into areas of mental health and family systems. There was a class that I gave several months ago where we analyzed a biblical text, and we ended up speaking about narcissistic abuse and specifically the unique trauma that is picked up from living in such a system. And we spoke about the role of the scapegoat. That video blew up. It's actually the most popular video on this channel. And because of the comments on that video, I had an insight, which actually related to another video that we had posted a few months ago about neurodiversity, about neurodivergent thinkers, about people who are wired a little bit differently than the majority of people. And I'm going to explain how those two things, the scapegoat and neurodiversity, both connect to each other, and how then they connect together to the Emperor's New Clothes. Emperor's No Clothes, New Clothes. He's not wearing clothes. Okay. Very, very quick review. The scapegoat. So we spoke about this at length, and you can watch that class. It's a much longer class, but the idea that in a family where you have a narcissistic parent, there's one rule, which is the narcissistic parent can never be wrong. The narcissist would rather die than be exposed for having any flaw, which every human is imperfect. Every human has a flaw, but the narcissist can never have a flaw. They have to be perfect. And so then who's going to bear the shame and the blame when things go wrong? You know, if the family's running late, let's say, it can't be the narcissistic parent who's making everyone late. So who's going to be the one who made everyone late? Well, someone is elected. They call them the scapegoat. I mean, they don't call them the scapegoat, but when you look at it, it's clear that they are the scapegoat. And this is the one who's always wrong. Now, oftentimes in the same family, there's a golden child who can do no wrong, who's always perfect. And then you have the scapegoat who can do no right. In fact, if the scapegoat ever does do something good, like accomplish something, get good grades, win an award, they'll be punished for it. And you're going to think, why would anyone punish their kid for doing well? Well, you have to understand the number one rule in the narcissistic family is that this narcissistic parent has to be perfect. Someone's got to carry that shame and blame, which is the scapegoat child. So if the scapegoat child ever does well, they're going to be severely punished and shamed for that. In the comments of that video, which again went very viral, I learned a lot. You know, there's a rabbinic saying that I've learned much from my teachers, even more from my colleagues, but from my students I've learned most of all. So in the comments, I learned something. People were talking about why a kid becomes the scapegoat. How do they get chosen as the scapegoat? And something I kept seeing over and over again in the comments was the truth teller, that the scapegoat is the truth teller. They are the one who threatens to expose the farce of this narcissistic game where the narcissistic parent everyone has to pretend that they're perfect. And because the scapegoat is the truth teller, that's how they become scapegoated. Okay, that's why they become punished with being scapegoated. Fine. But I started thinking about that. Well, why are they the truth teller? Are they just so rebellious? Are they looking for trouble? Like any child wants security. Why would they do anything to jeopardize their security? I mean, if you're talking about an adult, you're talking about Woodward and Bernstein, investigative journalists going and blowing the lid off the scandal. Okay, that's one thing. But why would a child elect to be the truth teller? And something clicked for me. I told you there was this other class we had on this channel about neurodivergence, about people who are wired differently, ADHD and autism and stuff like that. And I'll mention again that I mentioned in that class that I identify with having this feeling of being wired in a way where you feel like you're constantly missing the rules that everybody else seems to know. So just the basic rules for how adults function, or even since I was a kid. So even the rules that the kids had, how to function in a society, I didn't have those rules. And had to sort of like learn them by intense study and then like memorize them because they're never natural to me, and things that are intuitive to others. I'll give you an example, silly example, small talk. Everybody knows if you want to be nice to people, you have to say, how's the weather? What time did your flight come in? Silly stuff that really is totally irrelevant, but everybody does it. Okay. A neurodivergent person, not all neurodivergent people, because obviously this is not a monolithic community, but neurodivergent people often have a lot of trouble with that because it's like so silly and useless. Why are we doing this? Why are we playing this game? Like, do you really want to know what time my flight came in? It was 9:15. Oh, great. It was 9:15. No, actually, I was joking. It was 11:32. Like, does it make a difference to you now that you know it's 11:32? Okay. And then there's other stuff that's even more bewildering to a neurodivergent person, which is white lies. And people do it all the time. It's almost like neurotypical people cannot survive without constantly lying to each other. Like, they're constantly lying to each other. And anyone who doesn't lie is considered mean. And that's what often happens. And neurodivergent people often get labeled as curt or rude, and then they lose out on social opportunities. Now, obviously, nobody wants to lose out on social opportunities, because even if you're bad at socializing, you want people. Even if you're an introvert, you want to have relationships, and it becomes very, very lonely. And there's a lot of shame and self-hatred, like, why do I turn people away? Why do I make people angry at me? I mentioned also in that class about why I think there's this huge correlation, which needs to be studied more, between addiction and neurodivergence. I mentioned in that class something called the allostatic load, which basically means the amount of burden that's placed on a person in a given situation. So anybody, when they're going through like a high stress situation, then there's going to be a lot of extra burden on the allostatic load. But a neurodivergent person can have a very heavy allostatic load just from going through day-to-day life, because they're constantly trying to pick up on stuff that makes no sense to them and play along with this game that if you don't play along with, you get penalized, you get excluded from society, and people get hurt. I mean, that's even worse than that. It's not just, I don't want to miss out on social opportunities. It's, I have a conscience and I feel bad when I hurt people, but I'm constantly hurting people and I don't want to hurt people, right? So there's this incredible emotional burden that a neurodivergent person will often have just getting through day-to-day life. And that's why I think there's a high correlation between neurodivergent people and addiction, because if you have this really high allostatic load just from going through day-to-day life and doing something we call masking. Masking is trying to pretend to be like the majority of people so that you fit in. That's exhausting. And so when you're exhausted, you need to numb. And there comes addiction, or a lot of addictive behaviors, which are about numbing and zoning out and just basically getting relief from this really intense allostatic load that you're carrying just from trying to fit into society. So this all came together for me, and I realized it's possible. And I would love to hear from you in the comments. I'm not really interested in studies or statistics as much as I'm interested in anecdotal personal reports. I would love to hear if this resonates with you. That's really fascinating to me. Here's what I'm thinking. The scapegoat kid, the truth teller. Why is he a truth teller? Not because he's being rebellious and he wants to expose the truth. I think maybe In a lot of cases, he's just neurodivergent. And either he doesn't know how to play along with the farce that everyone else seemingly knows how to play along with, or maybe it's just he's trying to play along with it because he knows everyone wants him to play along with it, but eventually when you're masking all the time, it slips. You know, you can go out and about in the street and you can mask for a few hours, but you come home, eventually it slips. And if you're living with people, if you're in the family, eventually it slips. And I'm thinking maybe the little kid in the Emperor's New Clothes who says, hey, the king's not wearing any clothes. He's not doing it cynically. He's not trying to bust the king. He's this little neurodivergent kid. And he's like, hey, what's up? The king's not wearing any clothes. Like, no big deal. I'm not judging. The king's not wearing clothes. But you have to understand, if you do that in a narcissistic family, that is a capital crime. And especially because a narcissist can't imagine that anyone's innocently telling the truth. Because narcissists specifically have a knack at telling the truth in particularly cruel ways. In fact, if a narcissist is schmoozing with you, they're gathering information. And they're gathering information to use later to hurt you. So when they tell the truth later, it's specifically designed to be done in a cruel, hurtful way. And then they always have the great deflection of, well, you can't take the truth, right? So when the neurodivergent person, who is, in a funny way, the neurodivergent person is like the exact mirror opposite of the narcissist. The narcissist tells the truth that makes people squirm because he wants to see you squirm. The neurodivergent tells the truth that makes people squirm, but he doesn't know that it makes you squirm until like a month later when you tell him and he feels awful about it. He feels awful. He feels guilty. I wasn't trying to make anyone squirm. Oh, no. He has a conscience. Of course he has a conscience. So when the little truth teller says, hey, this narcissist just messed up. He's not trying to bust anyone. He's not trying to shame and blame. He's just saying the truth. But for a narcissist, A, that's the worst crime because you're exposing the narcissist's weakness. And B, from a narcissistic point of view, the narcissist can't even imagine that anyone would ever say an uncomfortable truth innocently without any malicious intent. Because that's exactly what narcissists do all day, is say uncomfortable truths deliberately with malicious intent, right? So here they're getting their signals crossed in a really tragic way that leads to a disastrous outcome where the narcissist thinks that the little truth teller, the little neurodivergent kid, is undermining him and trying to call him out and bust him. And really, he's just slipping with his mask and saying the truth, and he didn't think there was anything wrong with it. And now he's getting punished for the capital crime of exposing the farce. That's what I think might be going on, or at least in a lot of cases. I would love to hear from you. If you want more of the long version of these concepts, this is the talk about neurodiversity, and this is the talk about scapegoats in narcissistic families. Neurodiversity and scapegoats in narcissistic families. Okay, check out these videos. Thanks for watching. Comment below. Tell me if this resonates with your experience. I want to hear.